It was a routine flight on an otherwise unremarkable day. The hum of engines blended with the murmurs of passengers settling into their seats, adjusting their belongings, and preparing for the journey ahead. Among them was Evelyn, a middle-aged woman dressed in neatly pressed clothes, her posture stiff, her expression sharp. She liked to consider herself well-mannered, someone who adhered to societal rules and norms. Yet, there was an edge to her, a tendency to judge quickly and hold on to biases she rarely questioned. Seated nearby was Marcus, a young black soldier in his crisp uniform, his broad shoulders making the seat appear smaller than it was. He exuded quiet strength, his eyes scanning the cabin as if he was still on duty, his presence steady and composed. He placed his duffel bag under the seat with care, his movements deliberate, a stark contrast to the hurried shuffling of other passengers around him. Marcus had been deployed overseas for months and was finally heading home, eager to reunite with his family. As the boarding process continued, Evelyn glanced in Marcus's direction. Her eyes lingered a moment too long, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. Perhaps it was his uniform, or perhaps it was something deeper, buried within her own perceptions. She whispered to the woman next to her, something inaudible but clearly pointed, her gaze returning to Marcus with a look that was far from friendly. When the flight attendant announced that the passengers in the row needed to rearrange due to a last-minute change, Marcus politely offered to switch seats with Evelyn. His voice was calm, his tone respectful. But Evelyn's response was curt. "No, thank you," she said, her words clipped and her expression cold. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly unwilling to engage further. As the flight took off, the tension between them became palpable. Evelyn, unable to hide her unease, whispered another comment to the passenger beside her, loud enough for Marcus to hear. Her words were laced with prejudice, subtle but cutting. Marcus, though visibly hurt, remained silent. He had faced similar moments before and knew better than to react. Instead, he stared out the window, focusing on the clouds and letting the words drift past him. The hours dragged on. Evelyn's attitude didn't go unnoticed. A few passengers nearby exchanged glances, their expressions disapproving, but no one said anything. Marcus continued to carry himself with dignity, choosing to rise above the situation. The flight attendants, aware of the tension, tried to diffuse the discomfort with polite smiles and gestures, but the atmosphere remained heavy. When the plane finally landed, Evelyn gathered her belongings quickly, eager to disembark and leave the awkwardness behind. Marcus, meanwhile, waited patiently for his turn, his movements deliberate as he retrieved his duffel bag. As he exited the plane, he offered a quiet thank you to the flight crew, his voice steady despite the weight of the day. Evelyn barely noticed him as she hurried through the terminal, her mind already on the errands and obligations that awaited her. To her, the encounter was insignificant, a fleeting moment she wouldn't think twice about. She didn't notice the looks of disapproval from other passengers or the quiet whispers that followed her out of the gate. The next morning, Evelyn settled into her routine, sipping her coffee as she flipped through the news on her tablet. A headline caught her eye. Local hero returns home after saving lives overseas. Intrigued, she clicked on the article. Her heart stopped as she saw the photo accompanying the piece. It was Marcus, his uniform immaculate, his face serene. The article detailed his bravery during a mission that had saved countless lives, his sacrifice and dedication celebrated by his community and beyond. Evelyn's coffee cup trembled in her hand. The words blurred on the screen as guilt and regret washed over her. She recalled her dismissive attitude, her whispered comments, the coldness in her tone. Her mind raced as she pieced together the moments from the flight, realizing the enormity of her mistake. Marcus wasn't just a passenger. He was a hero, a man who had risked everything for others, including people like her. The screen seemed to mock her as she stared at his picture, the weight of her actions settling heavily on her chest. She set the tablet down, her mind flooded with questions and self-recrimination. How could she have been so blind? Why had she let her biases cloud her judgment? The realization was a jolt, a moment that would stay with her long after the article disappeared from the headlines. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that clung to her as she read the article over and over again. The words seemed to leap off the screen, each one cutting deeper than the last. Marcus had saved his entire unit during a dangerous mission overseas, risking his own life to pull injured comrades to safety. The article painted him as a selfless and courageous man, someone who exemplified the very best of humanity. Yet, all Evelyn could think about was the way she had dismissed him on the plane, treating him as though he were less than her simply because of the color of his skin and the assumptions she'd made. She set her coffee down and leaned back in her chair, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind wandered to her upbringing, to the small town she'd grown up in, where everyone looked the same, thought the same, and rarely questioned the world outside their bubble. She thought about her parents, her teachers, the subtle and not-so-subtle ways they'd shaped her views. It wasn't an excuse, she realized, but it was the foundation of her bias, one she'd never truly challenged until now. Later that day, Evelyn tried to push the incident out of her mind. She busied herself with errands, tidying her home, and preparing for the week ahead. But the memory of Marcus's quiet dignity and the article's powerful words kept resurfacing. It was as though she couldn't escape it. Every time she saw a headline about a soldier or caught a glimpse of someone in uniform, she thought of him. It wasn't just guilt she felt. It was a sense of shame, a deep recognition that she had been wrong on a level that shook her to her core. Meanwhile, Marcus had no idea his quiet departure from the plane had left such an impact. After returning home, he was focused on reconnecting with his family and adjusting to civilian life. His younger sister, Amara, had thrown a small welcome-home party, complete with homemade signs and his favorite meal. The warmth and love he felt that evening made the sting of the flight's encounter fade, though it wasn't completely forgotten. Marcus had grown used to moments like that. He hated them, of course, but he had long ago learned to endure them with grace, choosing to focus on the good rather than dwell on the bad. As the days passed, Evelyn found herself drawn deeper into the story of Marcus's heroism. She started looking up more articles about him, even finding a video interview he'd done shortly after returning home. In the clip, Marcus spoke with humility, downplaying his actions and shifting the focus to his team. "It wasn't just me," he said. "We all did our part. I was just doing what I had to do in the moment." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that Evelyn couldn't ignore. One night, as she lay in bed unable to sleep, Evelyn thought back to the moments leading up to her interaction with Marcus. She remembered how he had offered to switch seats, how kind and calm he had been despite her coldness. She thought about the way he had walked off the plane without a single word of complaint, even though he must have felt the sting of her rejection. The more she thought about it, the more her regret grew. She wanted to make things right, but she didn't know how. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began to notice how often she judged others without even realizing it. At the grocery store, at work, even in passing conversations with friends, she started to catch herself making assumptions based on appearance or background. It was a humbling realization, one that made her confront parts of herself she'd rather not acknowledge. But the thought of Marcus kept her going, pushing her to be better, to do better. One day, while scrolling through social media, Evelyn stumbled upon a community page dedicated to local veterans. To her surprise, she saw a post about Marcus, detailing an upcoming event where he would be speaking at a charity fundraiser for wounded soldiers. Her heart raced as she read the details. She felt a pull, an undeniable urge to attend the event and perhaps find a way to apologize to him in person. But doubt crept in. Would he even remember her? And if he did, would he want to hear what she had to say? Evelyn debated for days, going back and forth in her mind. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but she felt a need to at least acknowledge it. In the end, she decided to go. She told herself it wasn't just about her guilt. It was about showing support for someone who deserved it, someone who had sacrificed so much for others. If she got the chance to speak to him, she would take it, but even if she didn't, she hoped her presence would be a small step toward making amends. As the day of the event approached, Evelyn felt a mix of nerves and determination. She rehearsed what she might say, though no words seemed adequate. She didn't know if Marcus would forgive her, but she knew she had to try. What she didn't realize was that her decision to face him, to confront her own prejudice, would set off a chain of events that would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The day of the event arrived, and Evelyn found herself standing outside the community center, her heart pounding in her chest. She adjusted her scarf nervously, trying to gather the courage to step inside. The parking lot was full, and the sound of chatter and laughter from inside the hall spilled out into the crisp afternoon air. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, clutching the flyer she had printed with Marcus's name on it, as if it were a lifeline. Taking a deep breath, she walked through the doors. The hall was packed with people. Veterans, families, community leaders, and supporters filled the room, all gathered to honor those who had served. At the front of the hall was a small stage adorned with a simple banner that read, "Honoring Our Heroes." Evelyn scanned the crowd, her eyes searching for Marcus. She spotted him near the stage, talking to a group of attendees. He was smiling, his calm and approachable demeanor, putting everyone around him at ease. Evelyn's nerves surged as she realized how close she was to facing him. She found a seat near the back, unsure of when, or if, she should approach him. As the program began, speakers took the stage, sharing heartfelt stories and paying tribute to the sacrifices of service members. When Marcus was introduced, the room erupted in applause. Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat as he stepped onto the stage. Marcus spoke with the same humility and grace that Evelyn had seen in the video. He talked about his experiences overseas, the challenges he and his team had faced, and the importance of community in supporting returning soldiers. His words were simple but powerful, resonating deeply with everyone in the room. Evelyn couldn't help but feel a pang of shame as she remembered how she had dismissed him so casually on the plane. The man standing before her was not only a hero, but also a testament to strength, kindness, and resilience. When the program ended, attendees began mingling, some approaching Marcus to thank him for his service or share their own stories. Evelyn watched from a distance, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. But as the crowd around him thinned, she knew this was her chance. She stood up slowly, clutching the flyer in her hand as she made her way toward him. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the room. Marcus turned to face her, his expression warm but curious. Up close, he seemed even more composed, his presence steady and unshakable. Evelyn hesitated, her mind racing as she tried to find the right words. I don't know if you remember me," she began, her voice trembling. "We were on the same flight a few weeks ago." Marcus studied her for a moment, and Evelyn saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. She pressed on, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was rude to you. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I said things I shouldn't have. I'm so sorry. I had no right to treat you that way." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Evelyn felt the weight of the silence, her heart pounding as she awaited his response. Finally he spoke, his voice calm and steady. "I remembered," he said. "But you don't owe me an apology. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is what we do afterward." Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for your kindness, for your service, and for not holding it against me." Marcus nodded, offering her a small, understanding smile. "It's never too late to learn or change," he said. "I hope you'll take this as an opportunity to do both." Evelyn nodded, his words sinking deep into her heart. As she walked away, she felt a sense of relief, and a renewed determination to be better. She realized that Marcus's forgiveness was a gift, one she didn't deserve but would strive to honor. The experience had opened her eyes to her own biases and the importance of looking beyond appearances. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn found herself thinking about Marcus often. She started volunteering at her local veterans organization, wanting to give back in some small way to the people who had given so much for others. She also made a conscious effort to challenge her own assumptions and treat everyone she encountered with kindness and respect. For Marcus, the encounter on the plane and Evelyn's eventual apology became a reminder of why he served: to protect the values of compassion, understanding, and unity. He never saw Evelyn again, but he carried her words with him, a quiet affirmation that even the smallest acts of grace could make a difference. The story ended not with grand gestures, but with subtle, meaningful changes, a reminder that every person has the capacity to grow, to learn, and to choose kindness over judgment. And in those small, personal moments, lives can be transformed.